I love 3D tracking, and I know that you cannot do the best visual effects shots that are done today without unbelievably good 3D tracking. Syntheyes, from everything I've ever looked at, has the best 2D tracking system in the world, without even a close comparison. But there are things that are great in 3D Equalizer about the 2D tracker. Like the search area internally is getting blurred, so the tracks have less high frequency noise. So the tracks always look like really smooth. I'm like, wow, that's such a great 2D track. In Syntheyes, I've got to blur the entire image. Whatever it is that you're doing, whatever thing that you love to do, just do that. You have to keep doing that and keep honing your craft. And I mean hone your craft, like sharp edge, get really good at what you love to do. It should be easy because you love to do it.
Hi, and welcome to the VFX Artist Podcast. On today's episode, I have the fun job of bringing you a discussion about Matchmove with Matt Merkovich from the Matchmoving company. Matt has almost 3 decades of industry experience in the VFX industry, having been pivotal for the Matchmove behind Minority Report, Star Trek Voyager, The Amazing Spider-Man, and more. During today's discussion, Matt and I discuss why he thinks Syntheyes is the best matchmoving software out there. We also go on to discuss matchmoving principles, cameras, compare matchmoving softwares like 3D Equalizer and PFTrack, discuss the future of matchmoving, and more. Let's get to it. I'm quite excited actually to have you on the show, Matt. So
I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very, very happy to have been invited. So thank you.
Your journey seems incredible. Like you've been going since 1995. So and your matchmove work is incredible. And as far as I know, you're the only person that I know that uses Syntheyes.
Really?
As far as I'm aware, yeah, the only one that I've come across, at least in the UK.
Yeah, sure.
Because we don't.
I get that. I don't want to interrupt you, but you just reminded me of something. Like there was a time, like soft image. And it became very regional. It was like if you were in a particular part of the world, it was like everybody was using soft image there. And then if you were in another part of the world, it would be a different 3D app. So I find that these regional dialects of software preference are really interesting to me.
So I'm very much looking forward to finding out about your experiences using Syntheyes and I mean generally of the industry as well. So I'm looking forward to it. But even your own words, if you're able to just tell us a bit about yourself in the right way, in the right order, and just about the industry and all sorts.
So to start with an introduction to me, I think a good place to start is what my loves are in terms of the world of film and how what path I took to get here. So it's not, for me, it's not about the credit list or about what software.
Of course, yeah.
It's about when I was a little kid. There was a UHF channel here, so the ultra high frequency channel, like all the channel 18, and I was in Milwaukee at the time, in Wisconsin, kind of in the middle of the Midwest. And I would watch these UHF movies on Friday night, late at night, like 10 o'clock at night. And it would either be like a Hammer horror film, some Dracula film, or like something starring, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Awesome. Loved that. Or they would show shows from Toho, which were all the Japanese monster movies.
Right.
Loved those.
Yeah.
And then, you've got all the old Sinbad movies. You've got all the Ray Harryhausen films. And so that's where it started for me, like watching, these skeletons, these stop motion skeletons climb out of the ground and then like with swords, and you go, as a child, it just captures your imagination. And so I was like, wow, how do they do that? That was always like where my interest in visual effects came from. Originally special effects. So then as I got older, and I would make my own movies on VHS tape. You had did they have VHS PAL? Was that ever a thing?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I know all the technical things. I just was thinking, anyway.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So we would make movies on VHS tape, and then they would air on like local public access cable TV. Right. This is before the internet, before YouTube, before any of that.
Yeah.
So I've always been a storyteller, always been a filmmaker who ended up doing visual effects. Right. So to me, the visual effects component of the filmmaking was always a secondary. It was always this is a tool that we use to help tell the story. And so every visual effects shot I've ever done has always been, how can I best help tell the story from my little corner of the way over there.
Yeah.
And everybody's working in visual effects. You have that responsibility, like to help tell the story. So I think that's a good encapsulation of like who I am. I mean, anybody can go look at my IMDb and go, "Oh, those are the movies you worked on." But
yeah. Oh, that's incredible. Okay, so your interest and your love for film, did you then have to go study something related to film, or when did you get into the industry? I guess
that's a whole other thing. So I never went to film school. I never actually graduated from high school.
Right.
So
that's not bad. I mean, nothing wrong with that.
Right. So when I was a senior in high school, 12th grade, I had started a production company in Milwaukee.
Right. Wow.
So I'm like 17, 18 years old. And we're like, hey, we're going to make TV commercials for these local companies and like shoot industrial video for these companies, because we can't make a, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, like way, and not even in Milwaukee. I'm like in a little tiny not even a suburb, like a little town about 35 miles away. So how do you actualize that dream and still like make some money so that you can live? So I started a production company, and by the time I was a senior, McDonald's hired me to go to fly to New York and shoot the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade the parade. So I was in the parade with this giant Ikegami camera and a huge deck, walking the whole length of the parade, just shooting video for them, which then got edited together. And and we had a few other clients, like Pizza Hut was one, and anyway, those were the bigger ones. And then there was always this smaller, like really small. From there, I moved to Los Angeles because Hollywood, big movies. And I moved there, and it was, I just kind of crowbarred my way in. I bought a video toaster.
What's that?
Oh yeah, what's that? So if you watch Wayne's World, there's Garth is wearing a video toaster T-shirt in one of the scenes.
Right.
And Garth, of course, played by Dana Carvey. And Brad Carvey, his brother, was the engineer who designed the circuit board and like designed the hardware to make this thing called the video toaster, which was a card that fit in an Amiga computer.
Right.
And it had a video switcher, so you could have multiple camera inputs, and you could go camera 1, camera 2, you know. And then it had like a character generator, like a Chiron, and then it had a bunch like little things like that. But it had Lightwave 3D, and I was like, you know, as soon as I opened up Lightwave, I was like, wait a minute, there's a camera in here, and there are lights,
3D camera,
and I can place set pieces, and I could actually shoot a movie right here.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is like breathtaking to me. I have to actually back up a little bit, because the first movie I ever made, I was 9 years old. I had a Super 8 camera, and it was I shot a stop motion movie of dinosaurs, and I did it for science class. It was like, hey, you have to do a report, and you're like, okay, in class report to the rest of the students. Well, I'm like, I'm going to make a movie, and so I made this movie of dinosaurs, and they were all fighting each other, and the funny thing is, I didn't research anything. I didn't know anything about dinosaurs, but I knew what they looked like. Yeah. And I knew what they looked like attacking each other from all the Ray Harryhausen movies I watched. So it was really just a stop motion animation exercise. And then, you know, at the end, I turn the lights on. I'm so nervous. And the class is just like, what did you see? And the teacher is silent. And the teacher finally goes, clap. And it literally starts the slow clap from the 1980s movies. And the class just erupts in cheers. And then I got an A. And I was like, wow. And I learned this like terrible lesson that I don't actually need to know anything. I just need to make movies.
Sure, yeah, of course, yeah.
So you fast forward to that point where I'm looking at Lightwave, and I'm like, hey, I could actually do that right in here.
Yep. Sure,
so that's where I started in visual effects. I started out with what we called back then 3D animation, what everybody now calls CG or CGI, which I hate. I do. I hate it. I tell people all the time, it's like, you can call it CGI as soon as I can read a typewriter-generated book.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just go straight to the point, right? It's just animation.
You're doing 3D animation, so it's not, you know, it's not computer-generated imagery.
Yeah, you're making it. Yeah, it's not AI generated.
It's artist-generated imagery. And the paintbrush is the computer, and that's it. So, you know, I've been fighting this battle. I've been tilting at this windmill my entire career since CGI came to be. And that whole term CGI, like, I was there when it was born, because I started, like you mentioned Star Trek Voyager, Deep Space Nine. Before that, I was on Babylon 5, and then you know, the show Space Above and Beyond, and like all these flying spaceship shows. So CGI was born during that time period. And then later, I actually got in an argument with someone online.
about
never do that, but I got in an argument about the term CGI, and they were like, "Oh, it doesn't stand for computer generated imagery. It stands for computer graphics." And I was like, it's just like, you're just retconning what happened. I was there. So yeah, I did computer animation, and it was mostly, I started out my career flying spaceships around. And so, you know, my early childhood love of seeing Star Wars in the theater when I was like 13 years old, I think. You know, your eyes light up and you're like, wow, I'm gonna do that. And then I ended up working on, not Star Wars. I haven't worked on any of the Star Wars franchise, but I did end up working on Star Trek, which I always loved.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that kind of meandered around a little bit there, but that kind of gives you another picture.
Yeah. How did you go from Lightwave to tracking and Matchmove machine? So I'm
I have
curious
a
to find out.
very specific answer to that question.
Right.
And I was working at a company back then called Digital Muse. And that's where we were actually working on Star Trek Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and various other shows and projects. They're still around, Muse, and I'm still in contact with them. So one of those projects that was not Star Trek, it was not. It was a music video for the Backstreet Boys.
Yeah. Oh wow, my wife loves them.
Backstreet Boys, yeah. And it was the song was Larger Than Life. I'll never forget. Because when you're working on a music video, the music video is playing constantly and the song is playing constantly. So yeah. If you're not a fan of the Backstreet Boys and that's what you're doing,
of course.
The visual effects supervisor of that is named Chris. Oh my gosh, it's been so many years. I am so embarrassed I didn't remember Chris Watts' name. And Chris was instrumental in pioneering digital color grading with his work on the movie Pleasantville. Just read his bio on the IMDb. Truly talented and important guy in the history of visual effects. And it's ridiculous I could not remember his name. Chris, he actually worked on, what's the name of that? Pleasantville. And Pleasantville was one of the first movies. It was, I think, the first movie where every frame of film was scanned, brought into the computer, and could be color corrected.
Right.
Because you needed to like switch from this totally black and white film to parts of it being color and well, Chris was the visual effects supervisor of this Backstreet Boys video, which was directed by Joseph Kahn. And very talented director. I tried to do the 3D tracking on that in 3D Studio Max.
Right.
Yeah, I saw the look on your face. You're like, what? Why would anybody try to do that? Yeah. And so there was like a really rudimentary, very shabby, like 3D tracking thing built right into Max, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do it with that. I've always been a bit of an iconoclast that way. Like, when I got started in Lightwave, you have to remember everybody was working in Alias Power Animator or Softimage, and they're like, and we would get a lot of pushback like from those people, like, oh, you can't do anything in Lightwave. I mean, that's just crap. So and then we're like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to prove you wrong, and then. Well, the same thing. So I was like, I'm going to do this, and I think the only 3D tracking software really at the time may have been Buju, maybe. 3D Equalizer may have been like in its very earliest incarnations there, but I was unaware of it completely. But Buju, everybody would talk about Buju. I'm like, no, I'm going to do it in this shabby little junky thing. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is really bad. This is not working. Sometimes solves wouldn't work, and it was so much banging my head against the wall. So that was the first time I did 3D tracking. And then there was one point where Chris looked at me and he said these words: why don't you get some real software? I was like, oh! Oh my gosh. Yeah. So and at the time I was still using Lightwave, but I was just switching over to 3D Studio Max, and there was a plugin for 3D Studio Max called Scene Genie, and it was written by Russ Anderson. Russ, of course, we all now know is the author of Syntheyes. And but he wrote this piece of software called Scene Genie, which was not designed for 3D tracking, match moving, anything like that. What it could do, though, is you could set up these inverse calculations to solve for anything. So you could do like telescoping IK, or like you could put like an object on a track, on a spline, and then have like an arm, like a crane, like an arm come off of it that had like a telescoping part. And you could set up, you could rig this whole thing so you could just pull on the end of the crane, and it would pull it along the track and solve all of the kinematics. And it was amazing, but it was like beyond anything that could be done in any software to this day. Like, you get into Houdini and you'd be like, this is hard. Now, I don't know if that's still true, but back then I could create like a chain, like an IK link chain, where the first link of the chain would connect to the last link of the chain, and I could pull any part of the chain, and it would never break, even though it was a totally closed loop.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
So that was amazing. I never used Scene Genie for that. I did go to a trade show. It was the National Association of Broadcasters convention, the NAB show in Las Vegas. And they had a booth there, and I talked to Russ, and I was like, hey, the way your software is set up, I bet if you just put a front end on it and made like an interface so that I could do 2D tracking, and then set up, a few things, you could probably be doing camera solves very easily.
Yeah, sure.
I got a call about a month later, and he's like, hey, you want to take a look at this thing that I've done? And it was, so it was this totally built-in 3D tracking system within Scene Genie, a plugin for 3D Studio Max. And that is what I used to do all of the tracking on the analysis room for Minority Report. So every single time you see Tom Cruise manipulating clues in that screen, there were only 2 tracks that I did not do. And it was, we hired another guy, and it was like, he's not really working.
Give him some.
He still got a full credit right up there. Right. But it was, I did nearly every single shot. And more, there's more that I did in Minority Report than just the 3D tracking. I also, there were like CG elements that were built, like in the analysis room when the camera would tilt up and you see the ceiling with the precog vision display. That was all, I rendered all of that in 3D Studio Max and tracked it, of course, but I was the guy who did all the lighting, the shaders. So, yeah.
Sure, yeah, wow, amazing.
Yeah, so that's another long, winding story of like how I got from doing 3D animation to match moving, I guess.
Yeah, I'm quite curious to find out how that process went with the shots in Minority Report. So, was the pipeline set up to be working on plates as we currently are doing?
Oh, back then it was a very different thing. Here, I'm going to step away for a second, and I'm going to come back. I'm right here. I'm not gone. Hey, look.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have this thing back then called film. This is actually a roll of VFX film outs from the movie Mission Impossible. So we would get the film and we would scan it. We'd run it into a film scanner, and it would make these, we wouldn't even scan at 4K. Everything was scanned at 2K, 2048 by 1556. Full aperture. The aspect ratio wasn't widescreen. It was like the whole frame. So then we would do all of the work, and the LUTs that we would use are just like 2D LUTs. They would just be one column of numbers in, I think the scans were all 12-bit. And then, so you have that one column of numbers, and then you'd have the 10-bit column over here, and then you'd say these values equal these values. And it was all encoded logarithmically in log color space, so to speak.
Okay.
And the reason that was done is because the human eye can mostly see things in the midtones, and you really don't see, your ability to make out detail in the darks, not so good. Also in the highlights, say it would be this S log or this S curve. And that was how all of that was done. Oh, and the reason it was done that way is because hard drives were expensive, computers were slow. So, we wanted to take these big pieces of data and shrink them as much as we could while retaining as much information as we could. And you ended up with, what was the file format? The Cineon file format. So we get .cin files, which later became DPX files. And those DPX files then had a bunch of metadata, which contained even more information. And then we are where we are today. Everything is EXRs typically. And
Can we discuss the evolution of aspect ratios in your time as an artist? Well, I guess you've gone through all of them. So,
oh my gosh! Here's the deal. They say a goldfish grows to the size of its bowl. So with your VFX shots, so the shots we were doing way back, way back, we were doing those on the first digital format of videotape, which would be D1. So D1, the resolution of D1 was 720 by 486.
Right. Wow.
Rendering at 720 by 486. What a glorious time.
Yeah.
So you asked me earlier, you were like, wow, how have you been doing it? I'm like, I'm exhausted. I just finished a bunch of episodes on another show. Everything was either 8K, 6K, or when I was lucky, 5K.
Right. Wow.
But so much 8K footage, and it's like the computer, it just brings it back to that. Wow, I feel like I'm working on an Amiga computer again. And everything is slow. Everything is slowed way down. That's generally how I feel about all of it. It's like, so that's not so much an aspect ratio response, but when it comes to different aspect ratios, the other thing I can say is the latest fad, and what I'm seeing a lot of lately is anamorphic footage and widescreen anamorphic for everything. For everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, lately I just get surprised when I get on a show that's not anamorphic.
Right.
It's just
I think based on what I've seen in the, as time goes forward, I think it's a bit of a fad. I think that it's popular. I don't know why some people use it, because as a filmmaking tool, because you should always be using your tools to help tell the story. You have to ask, is this story best told with an anamorphic lens, which the anamorphic lens will give you a wider view of the world. So you get to move your head more and look, that's happening way over there. And look, that's happening way over there.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. But more importantly, the other fad is that everything has got a depth of field, which is this short. Like, why? Everything is like that. So nothing you're doing is unique. Like the things that you I'm going to do this because it's so, cool looking. It's like, it's cool looking in the same way that every single other thing is cool looking. And therefore it all becomes easy to ignore. So, you get these cameras now with these gigantic sensors like the Sony Venice, and everything's so shallow depth of field that it's silly.
Yeah, I mean, I've been noticing that, but it feels a bit out of place for film. Yeah, it's just because you'd expect that as a photographer, like a still image, but not.
Yeah,
film,
these are fads, and they come and go, and so they're popular now, and they won't be popular in a while. And we just have to adapt. You and I, as visual effects artists in this field, we just have to adapt.
Yeah. Hey, and welcome to the VFX Artist Podcast. I hope you've been enjoying our episodes. Thank you so much for all your support. We really appreciate it. If you are watching this episode on YouTube and you are not currently subscribed to our channel, we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. If you are listening to this episode on our audio platforms and you have the option to rate and review our episodes or our podcast, we'd love for you to leave us a rating or a review.